Hello, everybody. We have today with us one of the tribal leaders from the Colville Confederate Tribe. Hello, everybody. Hello. You don't get points when you keep on talking, right? So we have the pleasure. Mike's come all the way from the east side, so it's a long trip. It's more than 4 hours. But he's coming here to talk about a topic which was, in fact, in one of the books that have come out, River of Life. I first met Mike because Mike came in to do a PhD program. He had just stepped down as the chair of the Colville. And then he came to the University of Washington and got a PhD, and I was his faculty advisor. He came into a program that was between our program and the College of Engineering. And it was really interesting. The focus was supposed to be energy production and tribes. And some of the interactions were rather interesting because the college that I'm in was not considered to be probably engineering enough. And but this guy came in. He didn't even study. He got like 98 percentile on the GREs. He popped. And so the engineering faculty thought like, whoa, this guy is smart, and he is smart. I think he's the second smartest person, I think, that I know of in this world. And I've been in a lot of different places. And as a tribal leader, he's having to think about a lot of the issues that it tribes, because he's got to handle everything. He's negotiating with governments. He's looking at a lot of the salmon issues, dam issues, you name it, and he's in fact involved with it. Land issues, I guess, you've been advising. He's been on, I've seen in the news related to, he's been advising some of the Canadian groups on what they should do. So you're going to get a really good talk from him, and you're going to get it really from, I shouldn't say it because that's not the right way. You know, that's my background. Horses, you're going to get from the horse's mouth. You're not going to get the tail end that most of us faculty people tell you, you know, right? You guys get it? Okay. So you're going to find out that really the facts and what really goes on. And so I'm going to kind of let Mike go and give you his talk, and I think you'll enjoy it. Okay?
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon. I was going to talk about the Columbia Basin Project. It's the east side of the state, and it's one of the biggest projects on the planet, actually, at least in terms of area. And it's all about getting benefits from the Columbia River. Columbia River starts in British Columbia and has a lot of drop to it, which is important for energy production. It kind of zigzags down through Idaho and Oregon, Washington, ends up in Pacific Ocean, west of Portland. So it's a huge river, one of the biggest rivers in the world. In the 1920s and 30s, people started thinking about what can we use this water for. It was causing problems, floods, and flooded out Portland once in a while, things like that. And also the world was kind of changing too. Humans were starting to think big and like they could change things and move Earth around, that kind of thing. And even though technology was pretty low, technically they had huge machines, and so they were taking on big projects like the Panama Canal. They were moving mountains, moving just millions of tons of dirt, giant steam shovels that looked like they were from a different planet almost, you know, and they were just taking on these huge projects. And then Panama Canal was getting built, and then they started putting their sights on the Columbia River, and they're thinking like, well, we did Panama Canal, I think we could probably do something with this river. And there was a good site, the present site of Grand Coulee Dam, and that's what they decided they wanted to focus on. And they came up with this plan to irrigate eastern Washington. It's a lot of land, a lot of plateau land, a lot of very arid land, not a lot of rainfall. It's not like Seattle, you know. And that was kind of the dream. In the early 1900s, there were very few people in the Pacific Northwest. Washington State didn't have a lot of people. Seattle was pretty small yet. There was no I-5. no bowling. Then east side of the state, which people think is pretty sparse right now, like it was even more sparse then. And so there's pretty much 15 tribes. I'm from the Colville Confederated Tribes. We're a confederation of 12 really small tribes from all over Northwest, basically, but it includes Canadian people, Oregon people. Maybe you've heard of Chief Joseph. He's one of our tribes, 12 tribes. I'm from the Wenatchee tribe. That's another thing in the United States. They remove all the Indians and they name towns after them. So there's the town of Wenatchee. There's a tribe of Wenatchees. Tribe of Okanogans. There's a town of Okanagan. And it's like that all across the United States, pretty much. You won't see, often the Indians have been removed, but they still name the town after them. And that's the way it is. The thing to think about, I think, is interesting is these projects are built to benefit people. That's why they're doing it. And I think in a net sense of the word, they probably do benefit regions, they benefit people, they benefit the economics. There's reasons why they do this. Like I said, the reason they did this project was they were thinking irrigation mostly. They got all these millions of acres of land, and that if we could just get water there, we could grow crops, support jobs, support industry. Then there's probably a land speculation element too. You could buy this land for 1 cent and sell it for hundreds of dollars. There's kind of that aspect to it too. Same thing happened all across the country, right? And so anyway, there was lots of reasons, and they came together and decided, well, we'll put a dam there. We'll dam up the river. We'll pipe the water in the Columbia Basin, which is to the south. And we'll create benefits of irrigation. And we'll also create electricity. And so that's kind of what this is about. And I'm going the right way. I'm the chairman of the tribe. Tribes are kind of different than most governments. They do, they're responsible for everything. And like typical American government, the government does government stuff right, and they kind of stay out of the business stuff. Not always, but usually. And then, so they have a private sector, a government sector. For a lot of Indian tribes, everything's under one government. And so we have governmental powers. Also, we can have businesses. And it's not unusual for tribes that have a regular government, police, courts, all the things governments have. And then they might also have a big casino or a big business of some sort. And it's all under one umbrella. So there's about 500-something tribes in the country, 550-something, I think. Historically, their guess in there was about 20 million Indians in the United States, and probably like 90% were wiped out mostly by disease. They weren't able to deal with European germs, basically, when a lot of people died. And so by the time the settlers got here, immigrants got here, a lot of the Native Americans had already died, so to them it was like vacant land. This happens to be one of my grandfathers. He was the chief of the Intiat people. Intiat's a small little village, eastern Washington. Right below it's a dam called Rocky Reach Dam. But each little band or tribe would have their leader. In the Northwest, typically they had a chief. Different tribes across the country had different ways of organizing and different types of leadership, though. And so out of the 500 tribes, I think there was probably like thousands before. Almost any type of government you can imagine existed at one time or another. In the Northwest, the Columbia River, typically the tribes are pretty small. They fished off the Columbia River, and maybe they hunted or hunted buffalo and also gathered roots. That was kind of the Northwest. You go into the Eastern United States, there's very different cultures. There are a lot of agriculture-based cultures. Major cities of 20,000, 30,000 people. Pyramids, we think of pyramids in Mexico, but there are also pyramids in, go to St. Louis today, across the river, there's a pyramid. And so there were major high-density cities also, which probably made up the bulk of that 20 million people, right? And so they were doing intensive agriculture. Their densities in their towns were higher than Europe at the time. things changed real fast. 1900s, no people, no cities, hardly any industries. The term Skid Road comes from Seattle. They used to skid logs through this town, right? So, there was no atomic bombs. Here's Cooley Dam, as it is today. It's a big concrete structure. I think it's still the biggest concrete structure in the world. For years, it was the biggest dam in the world, but there's a few dams bigger now, like in Egypt and China. It's still right up there. It's a big dam. The reservoir behind that dam is roughly 180 miles long, hundreds of feet deep. And at the point of this dam, there's big pipes. They pump the water out and pump it into natural channels, which head south, and it feeds down into the Columbia Basin for agriculture. And so it uses natural channels. It also uses man-made ditches and different things, and they grow crops, grow cattle, it's one of the big exports for Washington State. My dad was a carpenter. He worked on the dam. A big thing was for the jobs, and there were no people here, so they actually had to bus people in from other parts of the country. And so I grew up in a little town called Omak, Washington. It's like 5,000 people. And everyone had a southern twang. Everyone there sounded like Bill Clinton or somebody, including my people. And I was wondering, like, why is that? And I found out, well, they bussed in all these people from Arkansas and Missouri to work on the dams. And they brought their culture, KKK, and moonshine, you name it. It's all in Omak, Washington. A lot of eastern Washington towns are like that. One of the problems they had was there was no people to sell the electricity they would produce, just tons and tons, or not tons isn't the right word, but lots of electricity. And there was no people. Who are you going to sell it to? And so they were really kind of desperate, trying to figure out uses for the electricity. They were trying to give it away. They were trying to promote the use of electricity in any way they could think of. World War II was going on, 1940s. So one of the uses was cyclotrons at Hanford Project in kind of southeast Washington. There's big power lines going from Cooley Dam to Hanford Project. They're still there today. They're still trying to clean it up, but so that electricity from the dam went directly into atomic bomb development. So there's ties there. Another big user was the aluminum industry. Aluminum is a process which can use lots of electricity if it's cheap enough. And they're part of their marketing efforts to get rid of all this electricity and kind of help pay for things. They actually subsidized the aluminum industry. And so at one time there were a lot of aluminum companies in the Columbia River drainage, and they were getting basically very cheap electricity from these dams. And it turns out today the Columbia River is like one big dam after another. Today it's almost all dammed up now. So Grand Coulee Dam, Bonneville Dam were a couple of early dams, but since then they've kind of infilled all the other vacant spots, and this is lots of major dams. And lots of smaller dams. There's a lot of tributaries to the Columbia River. There's probably over 200 dams in the Columbia River Basin altogether. A lot of them are small, but on the main stem Columbia, they're big, and they produce a lot of power. So they brought in aluminum industry. They kind of lured them in for the promise of cheap power, and they call them DSIs. If you talk to electricity people, will talk about DSIs, direct service industries. And they still have a special relationship with these dam people today. They get special rates, kind of a special institutions built around them. And because of cheap power, cheap aluminum, and we had people in Seattle, and Seattle has its own attributes, Boeing was one of the things that kind of spawned out of all this stuff too. And so the Boeing Corporation grows up, and you can argue that maybe it's kind of ties back to Cooley Dam and Columbia River electricity. I think you can make a good case for that. Would it have happened anyway? I don't know, maybe, but it's probably speeded it up. And so they needed aluminum. There was war going on. They needed to kick up production for warplanes and bombers and jets and missiles and rockets and whatever. And Seattle was the perfect place for that. Then out of this industry, I think you could argue that the high-tech computer age kind of spins out of this too. And so now we've got Microsoft, and across the river we got a lot of high-tech stuff. Well, here too, I guess, like Union. And it all, you can kind of argue it all goes back to this hydro development. And so it benefits Seattle a lot, benefits Portland, benefits Northwest region. What are the costs? And do those benefits go to everyone equally, or do some benefit more than others, or do some bear the cost more than others? Those are things we're still working on today. Aluminum companies, a lot of men were sent to war, and a lot of women went to work. Big social changes going on all across the country. They were coming up with ready kilowatt, all these marketing things trying to sell electricity, and they were trying to electrify everything, and they were touting how great electricity was, and it is, like who would do without it today. Some of the cost side, Columbia River was a big natural salmon river. It was one of the richest salmon rivers in the world. This is where my people live, my dad's people, in a place called Kettle Falls. They're called the Sinaiaks people. They used to catch millions of tons of salmon at this falls. And so you can see one jumping up there, but during the big fish runs, they'd put giant baskets underneath the falls, about as big as this movie screen here. And the fish would try to jump over the falls, and they'd fill the baskets up. And so for about 10,000 years, that's how my people lived. That's the time to go clear out the basket. Again, another 2,000 fish in each basket. So well, if the fish are 1 pound, that'd be a ton, but these are big fish, so probably average 30 pounds of fish. And so it's a lot of fish, tonnages of fish. And it's more than they could eat, right? And so what happened was this spot here turned into a market center. They dry the salmon, put it in bales, almost like hay. They have lots of sunshine, lots of wind. It's easy to dry it. And there's lots of natural flavorings like berries in Eastern Washington, different things like that. And so they were businessmen. They exported tons of salmon out of this spot. And so during the summertime, there'd be like 5,000 people gathered right at the falls. It was kind of a natural trade center. They find shells and jewelry and artifacts from the East Coast at this spot in the Columbia River. They find stuff from the Gulf of Mexico. People were traversing the country. They were businessmen, traders. There was a network of business going on for thousands of years. They used to think it was like 10,000 years. That's kind of the last ice age, but now that date keeps going back. Now they're talking, I don't know what the latest is, 160,000 years. And this keeps going back like every year. They say, oh, I guess humans are here longer than we thought. Yeah. Same falls. Cooley Dam was built, all this went underwater. It's all underwater now, and there's no fish layers in Cooley Dam. So people in my dad's generation, they fished there, they speared salmon, netted salmon, they lived on salmon. At least half the tribe did. And then the other half went and hunted buffalo. But Cooley Dam was built, boom, salmon stops. 1930s we were fishermen, 1940s we're out of work. There's no fish, there's nothing to eat, and we're also not businessmen, there's none to sell and trade. So it wasn't too good for us. This fishery is a little farther south. It's Celilo Falls. It's down there by, I think, the Dalles. This one got flooded a little later, so this is like 1956. Cooley Dam was early 1940s. And so there's still a lot of people alive that saw this yet. So like my elders who I look up to, they actually lived here and fished there, and like I hear stories from them all the time. And so this is 56. But it was a fishing culture, mostly. This guy on the left was the chief in charge of the falls. He's called the salmon chief. He had no other duties. His only duty was to manage fisheries on the falls. Then that last slide was Celilo Falls. They had a similar guy there, another salmon chief. And so those are the two big fisheries in the Columbia River. They both had a salmon chief. They both regulated fisheries. And the reason they regulated fisheries is they wanted to have a sustained salmon resource. And so they wouldn't catch all the fish. They let enough go up the river so they could spawn and then go back out to the ocean. And this continued for thousands of years. They actually regulated the fisheries for thousands of years. And to me, the interesting part too is kind of another thing is the the people at Kilo Falls, way up north, and the people in the southern falls, at Salilo Falls, they weren't always exactly friends either, and they were often at war. But they could put their war stuff down to manage the fisheries. They cooperate on the fisheries. So I always thought that was interesting. I don't even know if that would happen today on anything, but they did. They managed to keep it working, keep it going, and sustain it. So the chief, the salmon chief at Salilo would say, "Oh, this is Kilo Falls fish. He's heading for Kilo Falls." They knew the fish very well. They knew where they were going. They'd say, "We stopped fishing here and let those fish go." And so they were able to kind of jointly manage the Columbia River. You find the same thing with other resources like forestry and different things. People have this idea that there was a pristine wilderness and streams and rivers untouched by man. Not true. Indians were there. We were managing things. When they get in the river, get ready to spawn, they change color and get red, and they die after they spawn. So it's kind of like a. They also go a long ways. We have a hatchery now. I don't know if I have a picture in here, but we collect eggs and get the baby fish started, then we let them go. They just found the tagged fish in Japan this last summer, so they go all over the place. You probably shouldn't go to Fukushima, but this is the salmon chiefs at Salilo. It's kind of the Yakima tribes, Warmsping tribes, those tribes in that part of the world. The view on natives was that, and the lands was that these lands were surplus lands. We don't agree with that. We think those are our lands, but it was real common. They had posters saying free land in the West, or there were posters hanging up in Europe saying, "Come to America, the streets are lined with gold, there's free land," and they left out the part where they're stealing it from us, but that's just the Western story. This is more today. Still pretty waterfalls, meandering river. Now we got concrete lined ditches, straight as the arrow now. But they work, and they're producing agriculture. And it's kind of interesting now, the economics kind of changed over time. At one time, there was like lots of electricity, no people. Well, now as populations grow, now the demand for power and stuff goes up, and so like what would make more money is selling the power or subsidizing this agriculture, and it kind of changes from year to year. In some years, we'd probably pay the country to shut down the farming and just sell the power. Some years it's the other way around, but it's very political. These congressmen are very strong, so they don't really manage it for maximum economic benefit. There's a lot of politics going on. And so if you want to change anything in the Columbia Basin, you're going to have a big fight on your hand. You know. This is the aerial view. This is south of Cooley Dam, kind of towards Bull Dry Falls in the center part of the state. There's a lot of interest in unique geology. I won't go into it now, but it's like no other place in the world like this, you know. They're starting to conserve water better, and they used to have sprinklers on top of the pipes. Now they lower them down, but every year things kind of get a little better, incrementally better. Salmon, the dams have not been good for dams not good for salmon. So as the dams kind of increased, the salmon production went down. But actually, it's not the only influence either. And so they were getting impacted by overfishing before the dams were in place. There used to be dozens, if not hundreds, of fishermen at the mouth of the Columbia River from all over the world, Europe, Asia, and it's kind of basically unregulated. So there was overfishing taking place before the dams were built. And so like our people are hundreds of miles upriver. We don't really know what's going on, but some years there's fish, some years there's not. Overfishing factors. And those issues remain today, and they're kind of getting a handle on it. And there's today I probably have Indian people meeting in Asia or Europe somewhere. They're arguing about the fish planting programs, the fish harvest programs. It's an international world thing going on every day. Big business, they keep salmon, they keep a lot of data on it. There's a lot of people's lives involved, you know, a lot of money, even today. This is just a graph of different types of fish. In the 1960s and 70s, if you watched the media back, our 3-channel media on TV, but often they were blaming Indians for killing off all the fish. And we did fish with this is kind of like after they went to the Pacific Ocean and like everybody in the world was catching them. Then we're kind of getting to the last couple of fish up in the Columbia River that my people get caught holding the fish. Oh, the Indians caused all these problems, you know. That's not true. And it's turned out Indians have been kind of the savior of the fish now, because it's in our interest to get more fish because we like fish. But as we get more fish upriver, more fish have to pass by the front door of Wenatchee, Portland, Pacific Ocean. So we're building hatcheries, and we're improving habitat, and it benefits us, but it also benefits the world of fisheries too. A lot of streams water. They just have one story. Okanagan country and Wenatchee country, they tout themselves as the apple capitals of the world. It's ideal conditions for growing apples, and it's important business. I grew up picking apples myself, but part of the problem in the 1920s and 30s, 40s, 50s is there was no environmental laws to speak of, and people just did what they kind of wanted or what they thought was good. And so if you're an apple guy, growing apples is good to you, and they'd capture these streams and water and irrigate their apples and grow lots of apples, and there wasn't a lot of thought about, okay, well, what about the guy below me, downstream below me? Too bad there's no water for him, but that's too bad. And so we're kind of going in now, not just tribes, but other people too, but we're kind of going into those situations and we're saying, can we fix this, make it better? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't, but it turns out a lot of these old irrigation projects were not very efficient. Maybe they're just earth ditches and a lot of the water just seeps away. So sometimes we can just line the ditches, and simple as that, and increase water for the apples and for the salmon. And so there's a little stream in town of Okanagan, a little tiny town over there. I grew up in that area, and there was a sign there that said Salmon Creek, and I'm thinking, like, why did they call it Salmon Creek? I was born like half a century ago. I've never seen water in that creek. And I drive by it every day for half a century, and this seemed weird. And that was one of our projects. We fixed the ditches up in the watershed. Now there's water in there. Now there's salmon back in there. And a lot of that was my people that kind of pushed those policies and got the funding and fixed the irrigation. And so a lot of the fisheries improvements in the Columbia River come from my people. There's about 15 tribes involved. We have a long record now of suing the government. We have lots of lawyers negotiating with the government and trying to force them to mitigate these things. So if these dams are built in today, right, there's lots of laws where they'd have to plan, they'd have to mitigate these problems, address these problems before anything's built. But since there were no laws back then to speak of, they built the dams. Now we're in the process of kind of going backwards now. We're trying to fix them. And so, it would have been better to plan these out ahead of time, but this is the way it is. And we're trying to fix things as best we can today. So in some cases, we're going back and fixing the upper watersheds or the habitat improvements, things like that. Some cases, we're actually trying to re-engineer the dams themselves. We can't, we're limited in what we can do there, just structurally and money too. But we are making improvements on the dams, and we're working with lots of different entities, federal groups, state groups, and private fishermen, and there's a lot of technical stuff, a lot of engineering going on. But my people have been doing this for quite a while now, so like we're getting to be the experts in fisheries now, and we're getting to be the experts in a lot of these areas. My people were in the timber business since 1800s, and I came here and got a PhD in forestry. And I was talking to one of the professors, and I said, well, if he's going to plan the sawmill, and I was just talking to him like on a coffee break, and I said, well, who would you hire to help you build a sawmill? He said, I'd go to the Colville tribe. It made me laugh. That's us. He said, well, you guys are the only ones that built 2 sawmills in the last 50 years. Like, you guys are the latest ones. Makes sense, I guess. In the fall, it's real pretty. Right now, it's pretty too because there's lots of blossoms coming out in the river basins. Cherries, apples, peaches. They ship these apples everywhere now. I was in my job. I go to D.C. a lot, and there's the Watergate. There, the famous Watergate incident happened, but there's also a little mini mall there, and a Safeway's there, and there used to be a Howard Johnson's there. But I was staying there one time, and I went down there to get a snack in Safeway's, and there was a truck there from Brewster, Washington. He was delivering apples. I thought that was funny. That's where I live. You know, I could have hitched a ride back with them. But these apples go everywhere. We have an airport in Omak. Sometimes these Arab princes will land their big jets there and buy a box of apples and take off again. Nice apples. This talks about the migrant workers. When they destroyed the salmon, we had no way to survive. We couldn't catch fish. There were no businesses. Most of my people didn't have, they couldn't even speak English, really. And they didn't have a chance to go to school. There were no schools. And so a lot of my people were the early migrant workers. And so my grandpa and my grandpa's generation, early 1900s, asked, well, what did we do for a living? He said they'd hop the freight trains and go up and down the West Coast, picking fruit, picking grapes, picking whatever crops was there, and that's the only jobs they could get pretty much. And so that's what they did. And so it's kind of interesting to me. As a young boy, we'd go to Disneyland or somewhere, and every little town, my grandpa would say, oh, we stayed in this town, or we stayed in this town. You know, he had all this knowledge of these towns from the old days. Of course, they changed by then, but kind of the same. But now it's kind of changed, and now every decade or two, different groups of immigrants come in and do the apples. And so at first it was Mexican people, and there still are coming up, but they're kind of getting more permanent now. Now they're buying up businesses. And we have a lot of Mexican restaurants now, and they're becoming businessmen. So things are changing. One of the orchard owners was getting mad at the immigration people. He'd just get his workers up here. He had relationships with workers, kept coming back every year, but every once in a while they get busted and get shipped out to Mexico, I guess, and disrupting his farm operations. And so he tried something different. He chartered a plane from Jamaica. He brought in the plainload of Jamaican people in the Omak. So we had a different crowd in there now. And I guess immigration didn't know what to do with him, but they'll probably figure it out. But so if you go to Walmart in Omak, a whole bunch of guys from Jamaica there. But every decade it kind of changes. Good. What do I have to do? Are we done?
What are you going to talk about that?
I could tell you about this one. That's me. But this is kind of a culmination of a whole bunch of litigation in federal court and negotiation. It turns out to deal with these issues, we've had to develop a whole army of people that litigate and fight and negotiate. And so we have our own team of biologists and archaeologists and all kinds of scientists. So if you're interested in science, you might end up working for Indian tribes someday, I don't know. But and a lot of technical people, a lot of tribal leaders. And so we, at the end of this process of lawsuits, negotiations, seems like endless meetings, we got Bonneville Power Administration to fund some fisheries improvement. And so we had proposals, and these were all negotiated to mitigate some of the watersheds, to mitigate some of the dams. And also we brought in wildlife, because they affected fish, but they also affected big game like elk and deer and different things also. And so the tribes were able to get some mitigation dollars for that, actually improving some of these upper watersheds. And part of that also, we bought back a lot of land specifically just for wildlife. And so we've been purchasing big blocks, tracts of land, and we're trying to manage those parcels for wildlife. And so maybe they might have been a farm or something for 50 years. We acquire them under this program, and now we're managing those areas to produce, say, like mule deer or sharp-tailed grouse or elk or something else, you know. And some of these parcels are just huge, and we're talking like hundreds of thousands of acres of land. So anyway, the tribes, I forget how many tribes are in this deal, but I'm in the middle, and the guy on the right is here's Ralph Sampson. He used to be chairman for the Yakima Nation, so they're a similar sized tribe. Then we had Warm Springs in Oregon, and I think Nez Perce were in it, and Fort Hall, and there were some more tribes in this deal. But we negotiated a 10-year payment of almost, I think it's close to $1 billion. So we're talking pretty big money. $1 billion of improvement for wildlife. And this was like done, I forget what year this was done, but I think it was done like 10, 15 years ago, this picture. And I always keep thinking that Army guy behind me doesn't trust me. But, and I kept telling him, I'm going to add a couple zeros to this. And he'd come over and look, you know. But it was like the biggest day of my life. And I didn't even do all the work, because they were negotiating this for like, I don't know how many years. And but I just happened to be in the right spot, right time. I was the boss of the tribe, so I got to sign it. I wasn't involved with it, but there was probably like hundreds of people involved in this over many years. And so sometimes it pays me lucky to be there at the right spot, right time, and I get to sign it, so I'm on the documents, you know. And that work is going on now. Now this was the first phase. Now we're going to the second phase, and it's basic in negotiation. There's the government will say, "Well, we already paid you guys. We're done," and then we kind of say, "No, you need to pay more. We're not done." This first round was encouraging, but we need more funding, and so we say we want this. Government says they want zero, and we try to fight it out and get to some kind of agreement. And we're kind of there now. I think it's been agreed to now. So there'll be a round two, and I'm not involved with it this time, so I'm not sure about the numbers. But it's pretty big numbers, and we'll continue this improving the fish. And so we are making headway. When I was a kid, I was born in the 1950s, from the 1950s to probably 1970s, in the upper Columbia River. There's kind of like no salmon at all, hardly. They fish off these dams, and they just kind of, we call it head walls of dams, and the fish come under there. And I'd ask my cousins, "You guys see any fish?" And they'd say, "Well, about a month ago, one swam by." And it's like hot, you know. Eastern Washington's hot. When you get on that concrete, it's probably another 20 degrees hotter. And those guys are sitting out there all summer. I wasn't that patient. I just checked by. "You guys catch any fish yet?" And if they said, "Yeah," I'd stay. But it was like that for a long time. And so then as a result of things like this deal, we started fixing things. We're starting to get fish now. And, you know, they're not like pre-1940 levels, but we're getting enough fish like for our ceremonies and for our traditional dinners. And in a good year, it kind of goes up and down too. But in a good year, we have surplus fish. We're giving them to our neighboring tribes farther upriver, like Kalispell's, Coeur d'Alene tribes, ones that traditionally did have salmon, but there's no salmon there now. and they're even tougher shape than the culvert. So we share what we can when we can, and we're not selling any fish, mainly because we don't have that many fish. Farther downriver, the Yakima Nation, they're a little bit closer to the ocean. They get a lot more fish. They do commercially sell their fish, but I don't blame them. That's what we used to do. But farther upriver, we just don't have that many fish yet. Hopefully someday. But right now, we're just trying to get fish for kind of subsistence in our traditional dinners. It's kind of our custom, we call them traditional dinners, where we'll, on special occasions, we'll bring back our traditional foods like salmon or deer meat or elk meat, or we have certain roots we gather. There's like potato type roots that grow naturally in eastern Washington, camas and bitter roots. And then you go in the mountain, there's the berries and all kinds of berries in the mountains, and we used to live on those before, and we still gather them, but today we don't eat them like every day. Now they're like special occasions, and so that's kind of what we use the salmon for now, is these special occasions, or like it might be a birthday or a wedding or something like that, and we also have seasonal kind of ceremonies that we go through, and we have traditional dinners. Last week we had a ceremony called the First Salmon Ceremony near Leavenworth, Washington, just on Stevens Pass, Highway 2. It's a Bavarian village. It used to be where my people lived, but there's fisheries still there, and so we fish there. And we just had a ceremony. It's called the First Salmon Ceremony. Basically, there's certain songs that our elders sing and we go through these ceremonies. And so according to our customs, if we follow these ceremonies, which have been done for thousands of years, and if we share this resource with our friends and our relatives, and even our enemies sometimes, then the world will be good, and the Creator will keep giving us more salmon. And so that's kind of that's kind of how we're raised to believe that, and it seems to work, and that's kind of where we're at today. So today there'll be a round two. There'll be a different chairman with a different shirt on, and that's kind of where we're at today. And so in terms of benefit and cost, I told you we lost a lot of the fisheries that we're still working on. And the dam itself produces billions of dollars of energy. That goes to all these users, and they're in turn making money, basically, right? I mean, Boeing's another charity; they do pretty good. Microsoft does pretty good, and Portland does pretty good. A lot of people are making benefits off this energy, but a lot of the people where the dams are at kind of are screwed, And if you look at a map of economic prosperity in the country, there'll be some rich regions, like Seattle's doing pretty good. And you look at where there's extreme poverty, often this extreme poverty is where the dams are located. And so there's different reasons for that, and a lot of them are just kind of economics and geography are just tough. So like Cooley Dam's big dam, the water behind it's 180 miles long. It's kind of like a giant moat. Just getting across it's not easy. It's like a mile wide in places. And so bridges are expensive. There's pretty much no bridges. And so we own lots of land, but we can't access it. So even though we're in eastern Washington, we're surrounded by water on three sides of our land base. And because of these dams, we can't get nothing across it. And we have two ferry boats. They're small ferry boats. They can carry a few cars, but they can't really carry like industrial products, nothing in a big volume, And so it really limits what we can do business-wise. And so I keep talking to Senator Cantwell and Senator Murray. I said, when you build our bridge, Senator? And she says, well, we're working on it. And so they run these ferries, which are not cheap either, but like what kind of business can we run where we can't ship any products? It just makes it difficult. So OMAC's kind of okay on the western side of our land. OMAC is on Highway 97, but the rest of the reservation is pretty much cut off from the world. And it's the same for the non-Indian people up there too. So Perry County, the non-Indians suffer economically also. Stevens County, same situation, real high unemployment, not a lot of economic activity. And it's kind of a mixed bag. on one hand, there's poverty, but on the other hand, it's real beautiful. You know, we've got mountains and trees and wildlife, fly fishing, hunting. And so if you live there, you adapt and kind of like the lifestyle. I live up in the mountains. And so, but then if I want to get a job, it's hard to find jobs. Good jobs are few and far between. So a lot of people leave and they migrate like Seattle or Spokane or wherever. A lot of my relatives live in California. They just went there to work, I guess. But they come back. That's kind of what I want to talk about.
Mike, thank you very much. If I get one good question, you guys will get a point. But I want a good question. Oh, you guys are going to lose points.
Can anyone guess how much they paid us or they offered us for Green Coulee Dam in 1936? They were planning the dam, and someone who liked Indians actually said, well, what about those Indians? We're kind of messing them up. We should pay them something, don't you think? And then I wasn't there, but a bunch of the people there I heard said, like, why? They're Indians. They don't need nothing. And then there was an argument. But they did decide, we need to do something for the Indians. How much do you think they decided to give us? It was 1936. Close. I can remember this number because 1936, and they just reversed the numbers, they offered us $63,000, total payout. You know, they flooded 180 miles of land, they killed all the salmon, changed, kind of wiped out our culture. That was the payment, was offered with $63,000. Our people said, no, are you guys crazy? And we went to court. Our first time to court on this issue. And it didn't get resolved until 1994, and we were able to get a settlement with the help of Senator Gordon and some of the senators at that time. And we got a settlement for roughly 1% of the power output. And so, you know, we wanted more. It's the same thing, negotiations. We wanted more. They once said no. And they ended up with a number of roughly 1% in perpetuity. And so it's indexed to the price of electricity. If electricity goes up, we get more. And so if your power bills goes up, that would actually benefit me. But anyway, that works out to about $20 million a year. And so it's like, we thought it's worth more, but since it goes forever, and since it's indexed to the price, our people agreed to it. So that's what we got.
Did anybody come up with a question to say? Ooh, one question.
The energy industry is changing. You were talking about more dams. There are potential for more dams in some countries yet, and I think that's going to happen. Like British Columbia still has wild rivers and things. They're kind of in the same situation we were. They got the rivers and dams, which is kind of like not a lot of customers, and so they want to sell to California. But there's also alternative energy, solar energy and wind energy. And it's making things more complicated, and so it's like our president just said, the wind doesn't blow always, right? And that's kind of true. And so when the wind quits, you have to have a backup power to back up the wind. And it turns out they're using natural gas right now, but the technology is developing to kind of merge and meld all these different power sources together, and I think it's just a matter of time where it will be all figured out. And so we're kind of moving towards a national grid system, and so like take the wind. If the wind starts at the eastern state and flows across to the west, we'll have a system that's able to capture that wind in every state, you know. And so we're moving that way more every day. Prices of solar gets cheaper, and so I don't know if hydro will ever be. I don't think it's going to be obsolete. If nothing else, it's really good for backup power. But in the future, I think the trend is for more smaller dams. And so there's talk about that. So that's kind of where it's at.